Numenera is a pen and paper role-playing game based on the Cypher system, although now that you mention it, I do think that maybe the Cypher system is based on Numenera, where they basically took the structure of the game Numenera and distilled it into like a system-agnostic thing that they then used for different games. And let me tell you, it is fucking wild. Basically, it is set 5 billion years into the future of Earth, when countless civilizations have risen and fallen. The Earth looks utterly different and is speckled with the mysterious artifacts of these ancient civilizations, known collectively as the Numenera. The characters are brave adventurers that traverse the perilous wilds and delve into ancient dungeons filled with strange and often simply incomprehensible dangers to find the immense treasures that are the technological remnants of these ancient peoples. Okay, so I have a lot of respect for Numenera. I really do. I mean, just looking at the artwork alone, you just go, wow, this is so incredibly innovative and new and fresh. Which, let's be straight here for a moment, Numenera is absolutely cool and innovative. It is a beautiful setting with so much, so utterly alien stuff in it that plays into very, very few of the classic science fiction and fantasy tropes. It set out to do something that is essentially completely new. Hardly a new idea, but just worked in such a new way that every encounter that you have in the game will leave you baffled. Now, this might sound pretty damn great, and for the first couple of game sessions, it definitely is. Basically, the facial expression that your players will have during any given Numenera play session is this. Sometimes they will be swept up in the wondrousness of the world, but most of the time, and trust me on this, they will be confused. And that is precisely because Numenera is so incredibly innovative that it defies any kind of human frame of reference, with the exception that the characters are generally human. It doesn't do any kind of analogs of any sort. It is all completely new and utterly alien. This is a problem. Unlike books, films, and even, to an extent, video games, pen and paper RPGs thrive on the players deciding to do something and then doing it. They are confronted with a situation, they assess that situation, make judgments about the situation, and then try to turn it to their advantage. But in order to be able to do that, the players, not the characters, need to actually be able to understand what the fuck is going on. And this happens in a, yes, metagaming type process where players will draw upon their own frame of reference to fill this fictional world with assumptions that they have and have drawn from various different real-world phenomena and cultures and various different genre tropes that they are familiar with. Say your players are confronted with an orc shaman. Now, from those two words alone, pretty much all of your players will have some level of conception of what the thing that they are facing might look like and what it might be able to do. Some questions and the occasional knowledge roll will reveal additional information to specify the things that they have in their head, but usually, if it's something that is completely altering, it is in some way telegraphed. Most of the associations and assumptions are made automatically, and this is fine. You know, even though it's a spellcaster, it'll probably be still physically tough because it's an orc. They might not attack directly in favor of buffing or debuffing allies that they have present if they are present. And if it does attack directly, it will probably do so from a certain range and using naturalistic magic, not pure arcane energy. And you can very easily telegraph additional information about this creature by specifically describing certain aspects of it or subverting certain tropes. For instance, the staff that they have, the idol that is on it, is covered in a thin layer of frost. This telegraphs to the players to expect that this shaman will probably be using some form of ice magic. And though your metagaming bad reflex might go off at this point, understand that this really helps the players ground themselves in their characters, and it gives them an ability to, as their characters, properly formulate a plan of action and correctly assess the situation. It gives them a clearer picture of what is going on and what to expect. And it does this without you having to launch into a massive info dump, the first half of which we will have forgotten by the end of it. Now imagine if I told you that you are faced with a Rithkaloka. Just try to picture for a moment what I could mean with this word. Was whatever you were picturing remotely even this? Because this is what the Rithkaloka looks like. Based off this picture, you wouldn't even be able to guess how big it is, unless I told you that it is as large as a small house. You run into this creature far away from civilization, in the middle of what looks like an old debris field, speckled with ancient items of the Numenera, presumably. What do you think this creature might do, and how do you choose to interact with it, if at all? Here's what you should have guessed. This is a fully intelligent creature, right? Human level or more, bit of an alien mind, obsessed with using items of the Numenera to look back in time. It speaks many different languages, and it would prefer not to fight you, but it will if it feels threatened. If it does fight, it will take some of the eyeballs that it has and throw them at the players, where they will either explode or throw them forward in time by several minutes. And also sometimes they can shoot laser beams. It is also quite good at craftsmanship and swimming. Is this a cool and innovative creature? Absolutely it is. I think it's pretty cool as a GM, but if I was a player and I encountered this thing, even with the picture and with a basic description of what it is doing, I would have no idea how to anticipate its motivations, its abilities, what it might do, what I should do in relation to this. It's probably best to just not go there at all. And the thing is, you can't usually just go, I roll for character knowledge, because the point of Numenera is that most of the time, your characters don't know what's going on either. The only real way you have of finding out these things and experiencing these cool creatures is by just kind of going ahead and doing random things to see if something interesting happens. And the thing about that is that Numenera is the very last setting where you should just be walking around pressing buttons at random to see if something interesting will happen, because one false step in a way that you could not have possibly foreseen might spell your horrific end. You know the video of the dog who's fighting with like a really venomous snake? Seemingly completely oblivious to the fact that if it just manages to sink its fangs into its flesh once, the dog will die a horrific death? That is basically what it feels like as a player to watch your character do literally anything in Numenera. Oh, you decided to listen to the artifact that is here, which is a jar with a face on it and a brain that it also has inside, which presumably it uses to think, and it gave you some good advice and you actually listened to, oh, it just ate your brain also. Your brain is now in the jar. Oh, you decided to step through the portal that appeared in the middle of the air, going to some interesting location with the frilly edges. Well, I guess you are now some kind of weird cyber fusion beast of person and machine roaming some alternate dimension. Wait a minute, you looked at the guy's face? Why, it turns out now you are infected with flesh-eating nanobacteria. It is distinctly Lovecraftian in flavor, where the world is pervaded by powerful cosmic forces that one disturbs at one's own peril, and that once set free, one is effectively powerless to do anything against. But of course, Lovecraft stories examined these things primarily through the lens of how they interacted with the world that his readers were familiar with. It was like early 20th century New England, not some completely outlandish setting. Because that is what literally all of Numenera is. The entire gameplay loop is go to strange alien ancient location, be confused, either die because you did something that you couldn't have possibly foreseen will make you die, or the GM has to bullshit your way out of that situation in order to save your character, end up with a bunch of items, the purposes of which you don't quite understand, rinse and repeat. And after a while, the novelty of how beautiful all of this is sort of wears off. It stops being fun. It's just a bunch of things that happen in succession. And then you either stop trusting the game completely and you never do anything again because you know that anything you do could lead to your horrific death, or some would argue even worse, you stop caring about the stakes and your character because you know that your GM will always save you because the GM understands that you had no idea of foreseeing what would happen. It is extremely difficult to run Numenera in a way where it can show off its alienness while still being even remotely related to the frame of reference that the players might have. This goes down to the physics-defying landscape and the very cultures that inhabit the world themselves. Numenera does not do analogs. There's not even any dogs in this system, and all of the cultures are also entirely original. Now, is this cool? Yes, of course. It's a completely new, different thing that is unexplored by any pre-established tropes. It's not the kind of lazy world building where you just copy-paste something from one thing and then put it in another thing. Sometimes you weakly disguise it to pretend like it was your own idea. The problem is, and you might have been able to tell that I was being a bit facetious here, the thing about truly alien places and cultures that defy our frame of reference and expectations is that they paralyze us as players. Shalamas. What is this? It's a town, I'm telling you. What kind of aesthetic might it have? What kind of town might it be? You have no idea. If instead I told you that there was a town called Yikohara, a completely made up word by the way, first thing you might think about is that this is some kind of fantasy Japanese culture analog. Now immediately in your head you have a certain aesthetic that the place might have. You have the people will be looking a certain way, dressing a certain way. The government might be structured in a particular way that you already have in mind. Certain social norms that you will be now automatically obeying because that is what your character who understands the world would do. I can add more detail to this, and depending on if I say it's a small town or a big city or it's located by the coast or up by the mountains, you would immediately expand and adapt your view of this little fictional town. You would be able to fill in the blanks seamlessly without even thinking about it. And the vision, though it may not be the precise vision that I have in my head, will make sense to you in your head. A lot of information has been conveyed to you by activating your preconceived notions of what a town called Yikohara might look like. I never said medieval Japanese cultural analog. That's something that you yourself intuited. And now because of that, because it plays with things that you are familiar with, it feels a lot more real than if I had launched into a long dissertation about the specific layout of the town and how the houses are weird and built with certain architectural elements and the way that people dress, the predominant colors and clothing items that they wear, their social customs and norms, and how their names function. Not only does this save us a lot of time, it also makes the world feel like less of a set, because when you know what to expect, you know how to act. This is why if you look at science fiction, truly realistic aliens, of course we don't know if that actually is realistic, but let's say truly realistic aliens with completely different biology, psychology, technology to our own cultural norms that we can't even fathom and they can't fathom us back, it's almost impossible to communicate with them even. They don't appear very often because they just don't make for very good plots. They can be very interesting if used sparingly, but ultimately we can't really relate to them to the extent that it will create the emotional reactions that the creator of the work wants their viewers to experience. The frame of reference, even when explained in detail, is just too alien. As players, we cannot engage in the fundamental metagaming that allows us to function in this world at all. You can and should obviously innovate, it's highly interesting to do that, but you should do so in a framework that 21st century humans, or at least very genre-savvy players, might actually be able to understand. Otherwise, all references are completely decontextualized and utterly devoid of meaning. Everything that happens is just a series of random, unforeseeable events. And a series of random, unforeseeable events does not make for a good story. At best, those random, unforeseeable events might be good looking, a bit of eye candy, but that's basically like planet hopping on No Man's Sky. But of course you want to innovate, you want to put wacky, cool stuff in there, and many of the things that we know now used to be completely outlandish to someone not 100 years ago. So how do you innovate while also relating to the current framework? Well, first of all, let me really make clear that it is okay to sometimes use things that are completely alien, outlandish, unexpected, and seemingly random. They can be a very, very good punctuation of the experience to remind your players that this is a very, very weird thing that's going on. But the best way to make strange things feel familiar is to take the strange thing and combine it with a familiar thing. Because I still really like Numenera. This is how I run Numenera, and it is my attempt at putting it closer to my player's frame of reference. First thing I do, instead of the weird geography that we have in the original Numenera Earth, I just use modern-day Earth's geography. It's just that all of the cities and many of the biomes aren't where you'd expect them to be. The region known as Steadfast, which is where most of the stuff happens in Numenera, is like Southeast Asia and Eastern India. The great city of Yi, for instance, is in modern-day Bangladesh. Now, all of these locations continue to be in the game as they are in their mostly alien nature, but now we have a much better framework to understand how to relate to them and a much easier time understanding how they relate to each other. Then, because this is a sci-fi world, I give common regular people much greater mastery over the advanced technologies of the Numenera, because in the original setting they're basically it's medieval fantasy, but also there's weird devices sometimes. But of course, because this is still a fantasy world, I put in like a bit of a post-apocalyptic element, which of course you can derive post-apocalypse from the medieval period, Roman Empire's fallen, blah blah blah. Point is, they really don't understand these technologies that they're using. They just know the way that you don't understand how your cell phone works, except like they know even less about it. Think Warframe, right? But it's not the Tenno that you are, but more like the regular people that you meet on the planets. All the alternate dimensions that exist in Numenera, it's all cyberspace. It's the virtual world that is layered on top of one another by countless civilizations and that still runs through massive computer systems, satellites, and can be accessed pretty much wirelessly from anywhere. This also means that you can materialize and dematerialize things and people into and out of cyberspace. People, regular people, travel through the solar system on spaceships, although they are rather less like high-tech spaceship captains, as you would expect in Star Trek, but more like 16th century explorers, except that the ships that they are on, they don't fully understand them, and they just kind of try to keep them under control. Yes, this also means that the other planets in the solar system exist, but they're very different, as they are also in Numenera. They also exist. This is pretty much impossible to get there, but now they are integrated into a much larger and greater trade network. And it also allows me to have more like gray spots. I'm very much a gray spots GM. The creatures that players will generally encounter will be a lot more relatable. Like, for instance, instead of meeting something like what I've shown you before, they will meet a hippo, and it has purple skin, and it's got like sizzling electricity around its eyes. It won't surprise people that this thing will charge at them and shoot electricity from its eyes. All of those things have been conveyed properly. You can also add some just aesthetic details, like, oh, there's like spiral patterns on the hippo, and oh, and you've seen these hippos before, and those people use them as pack animals, but they have like glasses on. And Numenera does absolutely provide you with the tools to make these, by the way. It's just that I find that they are criminally underused. All of the alien species that come from other solar systems, faraway galaxies, or, God forbid, alternate dimensions, they're all humans, right? They all used to be people, and they eventually just completely lost touch with their original humanity, which is a fairly realistic scenario when we think like 5 billion years into the future. All of this conserves, in my opinion, the weirdness and mysticism of Numenera, but couches it in a framework that is much more comfortable for the players because they understand it better. We don't go to explore geographical features that are plucked out of thin air. No. These are the Himalayas. Let's see how they have changed. These are the vast deserts of Mars. Let's see if they hold up to what we imagine. In cyberspace, knowing as players that it is cyberspace, we expect countless different planes with very, very different rules because we understand that it is a virtual world. And even the materializing and the dematerializing into cyberspace and out of cyberspace is hardly something that hasn't been done before. As explorers, we expect krakens to lurk underneath the deep dark beyond. We expect agents of foreign empires with discernible and understandable political motivations, even if they are quite culturally alien. From isolated villages in the wilderness to cyberpunk-esque supermetropoli, we get to explore various different tropes that we are quite familiar with, which allows the truly weird elements of Numenera, which I try to confront people with quite frequently, but not too frequently, really get to shine. Through this much harsher juxtaposition, what we actually end up seeing becomes a color accentuated by contrast. Otherwise, it is simply monochrome madness, and it loses its touch quite quickly. This is of course a highly individual threshold. Some people will prefer it closer to their frame of reference, others would prefer it farther away. I can also imagine that there's a lot of people who are actually very, very familiar with Numenera lore, who understand it well enough to also understand its frame of reference and can play in it no problem. It's just that this doesn't apply to the overwhelming majority of people who play Numenera. There isn't really an easy blanket solution to this problem, but that's not even what this video is about. If you are setting out to create a piece of fiction that is in all ways truly original, you should maybe consider if it is still good. It might end up reading like an interesting scientific paper, but to us as people, it will be so far removed from reality that it won't feel real, and just a little touch of the mundane and relatable can ground it in our consciousness and really make it be excellent. It's really important that the reader or player or, viewer, whatever medium you are using, can project some of their own preconceptions onto the world so they don't feel entirely like a spectator and more like an involved actor. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities, but do not spam them. Consider supporting me on Patreon or Subscribestar, buying some of my merchandise or my short story collection. And in that spirit, go forth and be original, but don't take it too far. And see you around, cunts.